My game City of Six Moons is having a bit of a moment right now, which is really lovely and unexpected and a little overwhelming. I'm really grateful to have something blow up like this. Someone asked me if it was weird having something be so successful that is so different than my serious work, and I don't know if it is all that different, though I understand where they're coming from. City of Six Moons is presented as a found object from an alien culture. It's written in an alien iconographic language that you have to translate in order to understand how to play the game. Whereas most of my work is a series of angry political games about systems of oppression, using board games to model, understand, and critique real-world systems. It's kind of my whole thing. It's what people ask me about in interviews. It's why the New Yorker article happened. It's what my book is about that's coming out in January. And I can see, this seems on the surface to be quite different than something like City of Six Moons. It's not really playing in that space. But there is a connection, and to illustrate that, I'm going to need to blitz through some theory, so bear with me. Games are good at modeling systems because they are themselves systems. Rules and triggers and interactions. Video games can model things that are quite complex, because the game enforces all those rules and triggers and interactions for you. It runs invisibly under the hood. With a board game, everything is visible and tangible. It has to be operated manually, and you need to enforce the rules yourself. The processing speed and power of a human being is slower than a computer, so a board game, a physical model, of necessity is much simpler and coarser. And these are all drawbacks when we're talking about the detail or accuracy of a model. But when we're talking about observing a model, this simplicity and this transparency is an advantage. Because you have to operate the game, you are seeing and touching every part of it. Because you are enforcing the rules, you are understanding those rules, understanding those systems. And unlike a video game, generally you can't just start playing something and figure it out as you go along. In order to operate the game, you need to know how the whole system works and fits together. You need to learn or be taught all of the rules. This again is typically seen as a disadvantage, the chore you have to slog through before you can get to the game. But if we're looking at board games as a tool for recognizing systemic issues and making arguments about them, as a way to understand systems, then learning how to play is a core source of meaning. In this framework, learning and playing are not separate activities or even overlapping ones, but a single process. So in this context, the game with the alien pictographs is just as much in my wheelhouse as games that make political arguments, because at the core of those games is this same idea, that learning the game is a part of playing it and a source of meaning. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. What are rules? How are they taught? And how does that shape the way we look at and play games? When we talk about a game's rules, we're really talking about two different things. The way the game's mechanisms work together, and the words we use to describe and explain them. Rules writing is usually seen as a form of technical writing, the same kind of writing used for the manual for my ring light.
Take the flexible smartphone adapter and screw it to the 1/4 inch 20 receptacle located inside of the ring light. Once secure, insert your smartphone into the mount. When you release the mount, it will tightly clamp your smartphone, keeping it secure.
No one reads sentences like this for pleasure. Its purpose is to convey information in as unambiguous a manner as possible. When I was in school, I was given a technical writing assignment to explain step by step how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I said something like, spread some peanut butter on a slice of bread, spread some jelly on another slice of bread, smush them together. Cut it diagonally, that's important. It tastes better if it's cut diagonally. And I got a D on the assignment because I didn't tell them to take the bread out of the bag, didn't tell them to open the jars, didn't tell them what to spread it with. The teacher said I left out necessary information. And there's part of me that wanted to argue, come on, they know how to open the jar, but, I get it. I get that's the point of the exercise, to be that exacting, to be that precise. And that's why I'll never be a good technical writer. But the teacher also marked me down for using the word smush to describe the act of putting the two pieces of bread together. And he struck out, it tastes better if it's cut diagonally, so that part was unnecessary. And that's why I'll never want to be a good technical writer. It cuts out all the bits that are human and personable and fun to read. My background is hobbyist simulation gaming. I got my start doing historical hex encounter war games, and then shifted into political and social history. And these games have a reputation for being long, complex, and kinda kludgy, and sometimes their reputation is warranted, but often they're simpler than a heavy Euro. They just don't feel that way because of how the rules are written. The stereotypical wargame rulebook is 2 or even 3 columns of mostly text using the case system. The case system organizes the rules into numbered sections and subsections. For example, in fighting formations, the rule for the move command is Rule 35, and you have Rule 35.1, movement costs, 35.2, fire arcs and movement, 35.3, combined arms movement, 35.4, melee entry and exit, 35.5, column movement, and 35.6, opportunity fire, which is itself divided into 35.61, op fire procedure, 35.62, exceptions, 35.63, rate of fire, and 35.64, resume the order. Whereas 35.2 is broken down into 35.21 forward movement, 35.22 reverse movement, and 35.23 stationary pivoting. And none of this stuff is really complicated, it just feels complicated. I could teach it to you face to face, let me tell you how moving works, and you'd have no idea it was covering 14 different headings. So why is it like this? Doesn't it get in the way of learning the game? Yes, but when you use the book as a reference, it's very handy to have each tiny point of minutia broken out with its own numbered heading. Wait, how does pivoting work again? 35.23, stationary pivoting, boom. You don't need to read through the whole movement section to find it. Inside each rulebook, there are 2 wolves, one who loves to teach and one who loves to look things up. I ship it. And there are lots of different ways to resolve this essential tension, with different games leaning one way or the other. Complex games tend to lean more heavily on reference, and it's common to do so in hex encounter games because they're often building on design concepts that is expected you to already be familiar with. Some games even split the rules into 2 books. Root, for example, has a learning to play book, a conversational approach designed to teach you the game, and the law of Root, written in the case system to act as a reference, which makes a lot of sense for a game that's trying to adapt wargaming concepts and modeling techniques to make them more approachable for a broader audience. Lavish productions like Voidfall or Septima, in addition to a rulebook that tells you how to put the game away, include a detailed glossary of every card and every icon, and this approach makes sense for games like these, where the core of it is relatively simple, but there exists cards with specific exceptions and interactions. And these are all games where the format the rulebook takes is influenced by the design of the game, and that makes intuitive sense. But it also works the other way around. When I took what was originally a Cradle of Civilization city building game and turned it into City of Six Moons, I changed some of the mechanisms to express it cleanly in that game's idiom. The design of the game was influenced by the format I knew the rules were going to take. And if you're going to design a game that you know you're going to write in the case system, a style of rules that is very procedural, probably you're going to end up designing a fairly procedural game. The most procedural game I've ever played is Revolution, the Dutch Revolt. Like most Francis Tresham games, it's got no randomness. Everything is mathematically deterministic. It's essentially an area majority game. An area majority game where every turn has 20 phases. So all the players do phase 1, then all the players do phase 2, all the way down to 20. And we do that every turn, which is why the game takes 6 hours to play. It's a strategy game, not a tactical one, so you really need to pay attention and plan out your turn. Remember what you're going to do each phase. Do the things in the early phases that will let you do what you want in the later phases, because if you flub something or miscalculate, like most Francis Tresham games, you have now lost, and you get to sit with that for the next 5 hours. When I've gotten it on the table, which is not often, most people find it really difficult to wrap their heads around the game and its decision space. And I'm not saying this to beat up on the game, which I do genuinely admire, but this is a platonic ideal of a case system game. Now, I don't know if the chicken came before the egg here. Maybe the rules are in the case system because each turn has 20 phases, or maybe each turn has 20 phases because the rules are in the case system. I'm not sure the distinction really matters. I'm not sure that rulebooks in games are actually different things, or that writing a rulebook and designing a game are different processes. It's like talking about a novel and separating out the characters, the plot, and the dialogue.
People often talk of these things as if they had a kind of internecine distinctness, instead of melting into each other at every breath and being intimately associated parts of one general effort of expression. I cannot imagine composition existing in a series of blocks, nor conceive in any novel worth discussing at all of a passage of description that is not in its intention narrative, a passage of dialogue that is not in its intention descriptive, a touch of truth of any sort that does not partake of the nature of incident, and an incident that derives its interest from any other source than the general and only source of the success of a work of art, that of being illustrative. A novel is a living thing, all one and continuous, like every other organism, and in proportion as it lives will it be found, I think, that in each of the parts there is something of each of the other parts. What is character but the determination of incident? What is incident but the illustration of character?
I've been thinking a lot lately about Richard Berg. He died 5 years ago. Over the course of a career of 40 plus years, he designed almost 200 games, mostly historical hex encounter games. But within that idiom, his work had a lot of personality. You always knew when you were playing a Berg game, and you always knew when you were reading a Berg rulebook. It's filled with little asides and one-liners, like his voice just resonates throughout the thing. He's probably best known for 1979's Campaign for North Africa, a game that is infamous for being complicated, long, and tedious.
Playing the most complicated board game ever invented, Campaign for North Africa. I bought it off eBay. But it smells a little like chili, but all the pieces are there.
There's a rule that gets cited every time people mention the game, Rule 52.6, the Italian pasta rule. In order to eat, your Italian troops need to spend an extra point of water to boil their pasta. And it's not even modeling anything that actually happened, because in World War II, Italians didn't cook their pasta in water, they cooked it in sauce. And people point to this as an example of the game's excesses, the designer's hubris. But, it's a joke, man. This rule specifically is a joke Berg is making on purpose. And the game as a whole is a joke, a lampooning of high-complexity games, and a prank on the nerds who want that. The main question with Campaign for North Africa is why? The answer superficially is because that's what the feedback said you wanted. CNA is virtually unplayable. The rules describe a single game turn as the most ambitious undertaking a gamer can attempt, advising you when you finish a turn to contact your loved ones to let them know you're still alive. It suggests you have 8 to 10 players so that it's easier to manage all the paperwork the game has you do over the course of its 1,200-hour playtime.
I did play test it for him, and I was the 7th Armored Division commander, which meant that I walked around with a pad of about 80 pieces of paper It was a paper nightmare, that game. Oh my God.
Were you having fun?
No.
So, well, isn't that like, one of the purposes of gaming is to have fun? Did Berg realize that? Did he just got to be an obsession? He had to complete it, or what?
He was trying to throw. He had pasta points. I mean, for God's sake,
right.
Water. You had to make pasta. The Italian units used up more water than the other guys when they had pasta. I mean, it was ridiculous, and it was meant to be ridiculous.
The victory conditions identify the game as being a waste of your time.
It took me 3.5 years. I said, when are you going to put this thing out? He said, well, we're not going to put it out. I said, we want you to, we want to make sure it's balanced. I said, what? We want to make sure. I said, I'll tell you what. I was feeling like, listen, you fool. It takes about 3 years to even try to play it. I said, somebody calls in and says it's not balanced. I said, I will say, I don't think you played it right. Try it again.
This game is a shitpost. Berg had big shitposter energy. In my experience, he liked to cause mischief and be goofy and weird. And hey, I like to cause mischief. I like to be goofy and weird, so I think that's why I liked him. In 2016, when Houndspiel got started, he sent us an email and asked if we wanted any ready-to-roll Bergie Shlaboompas, by which he meant, can I pitch you some games? And all of his emails to us were like that, in this kind of weird personal vernacular. It was like talking to a straight Chuck Tingle. He was the kind of guy where it felt like he would get together with his buddies and record a doo-wop version of a Latin drinking song. And I'm saying that because he did get together with his buddies and record a doo-wop version of a Latin drinking song.
Post a good dog, you into 10. Post molest them, send it to 10. No stop, baby, humos, cariamo, sing it to.
For a couple years in the early 60s, Berg was part of the Escorts, along with his high school buddies Rodney Garrison, Richard Perry, and Richard Rosenberg. They were soon joined by Goldie Zelkowitz and became Goldie and the Escorts. They recorded one absolute banger, Submarine Race Watching.
Well, I take these crazy dances, but I want something more.
Oh yeah.
I got an urge to submerge, so let's head for the shore. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
The group had a minor hit with a cover from West Side Story, but they soon disbanded. Goldie, the star of the group by the end, formed Goldie and the Gingerbreads, the first all-girl rock band signed by a major record label.
My skinny Vinny, he's a crazy guy. He's a 1 foot thick and a 6 foot high.
If you're into music, you might know Goldie better as Genya Ravan. Under that name, she fronted the jazz rock band 10 Wheel Drive.
I can see it, baby, looking wild and looking tired and looking for me.
Ravan went on to have a solo career and starting in the 70s moved into production. She's often cited as the first woman to produce records for male artists.
Everybody play the right chords there, or did we not? Is it in tune?
Yeah.
That's a little out, isn't it? Yeah, all right, let me hear the rest of it. Let's just see what it is.
She did all this in an industry that's deeply sexist, reinventing herself over and over again to escape the poverty and trauma she was born into.
I think my toughness came from nobody is going to tell me what the fuck to do ever in my life again. Ever.
Now, is Genya Ravan really relevant to this video? No, but I think she's incredible and it's my video, so here we are. Around the time Ravan was producing the debut album for the punk band The Dead Boys, Richard Berg was working at SPI on Campaign for North Africa, creating rules not for balance, not for play experience, but as a form of misery-based anti-comedy you could inflict on yourself and your friends. It's a fascinating object, and big thanks to the Internet Archive for preserving it, because there's no way I'm going to spend $350 plus shipping to track down a copy. Now, not everyone thinks it's as funny as I do. A lot of people just think it's a bad game, or that Berg was a bad designer. Some of his games have a reputation for rule sets that aren't quite finished. And one of these that gets cited a lot is War of the Ring, a 1977 co-design with Howard Barish. This one usually goes for hundreds of dollars as well, but I found a cheap copy and used this month's Patreon money to grab it. It's the first board game adaptation of Lord of the Rings. It has all the characters and magic items, but it's not really compelling. It's a hex and counter game from the 70s, and it feels like it. The one thing I've heard about this game, though, over and over again, is that it is broken. The Fellowship wins by bringing the ring to Mount Doom and casting it in. But if you just park all Sauron's forces on that hex, and nothing in the rules says you can't do that, the Fellowship can't enter that hex, and therefore they can never win. It's an obvious flaw. But then I actually get the game on the table and I actually read the rules, and in order for Sauron to win, they need to gain control of certain hexes, and to do that, you really can't just park your giant stack on Mount Doom. You need those units to take those citadels. The game does not end in a draw. It will just keep going turn after turn until one of the players achieves their victory conditions. So camping all your dudes at the crack of doom isn't some kind of overpowered strategy, it's just a way to irritate your opponent and waste their time. Competitive games work on the assumption that we're each trying to win. It incentivizes our behavior and drives our strategies. If we start playing Connect 4 and I put my arm on top of the grate so you can't put your checkers in, the game doesn't say I can't do that. Is it the game broken? Are the rules bad? Or am I just an asshole? But here's a hot take. Even if Sauron could win the game by taking a nap on Mount Doom, if you do that, you're still just an asshole. Because we're not there to show how clever we are or how much skill we have. We're there because Tom Bombadil might show up or Merry and Pippin are going to get in the pipeweed.
Something about Berg, too, and you, is that you made the transition from let's do simulations to let's have a competitive game that you would play at WBC. I would say the Avalon Hill model. You made that transition.
Yes.
I'm not sure that Berg ever did.
No.
We're not playing Campaign for North Africa, a competitive game, as a competitive experience. We're playing it as an act of self-harm. This decentering of balance, even of the game itself, is common in the Berg games I've played.
First off, he didn't actually like to play games that much.
I got that impression from him. Yeah, I got that impression from him.
I have a lot of affinity for the way Richard made games. I like playing games more than he did, and I care about the balance, but I don't care that much. When I make a rule for a game, I'm not thinking about how it affects competitive play. I'm thinking about what does this let me express? How does this help me tell a story or make an argument? If someone comes at me and is like, that is our product isn't balanced and one of these sides is more interesting to play than the other, like, I don't agree with them. I think they're wrong on that, but even if they're right, I don't really care because that's not the purpose the game was built for. And I expect if you're going to play a game about 100 million deaths from cancer in the 20th century, you're not playing it for a tight competitive game. You're playing it to experience that story and the arguments the game is making and observe the system at work. So it's about meeting the game where it is, about playing the game in the spirit it's intended to be played in. And I know that is a very contentious subject. In this video, I've been talking about games through the framework of models and systems, which is a very designer-centered approach. There is also the framework of agency, which centers players not as audience, but as authors. The game is not the art, the play is. In this framework, rules exist not to create meaning, but to create a space for meaning, a canvas for the expression and creativity of the players. After all, you can't have a game without players unless we're talking about zero-player games like Conway's Game of Life. This framework probably has its fullest expression in the TTRPG space. If I want to tie some rockets to some skis to propel myself across a ravine, my GM doesn't say, your character wouldn't do that, or you're not playing in the spirit of the game. And if the RPG's designer told me I was playing their game wrong by doing that, I'd tell them to get on their bike.
Nobody is going to tell me what the fuck to do.
If we're talking about games as agency, the players are playing it wrong is hierarchical and elitist. Let's talk about Settlers of Catan. I don't need to explain Catan, right? You trade resources with other players so you can build things and be the best colonizer you can. The game is balanced around those trades, around players helping each other out. If players don't trade with each other, the game becomes this long slog and, oh boy, we rolled the robber. Again. Yay! And because it's a zero-sum game, if players have any skill at all, they will not trade unless it's to their advantage and not to their opponents. And since everyone is playing like that, no one is actually trading, and the game is a long slog. Robble, robble, robble. And that's how it went for almost every game of Catan I've ever played. One game went differently. We were just more willing to accept trades that were equal or even in the other player's favor. It actually moved along at a decent pace. We had a lot of fun, and all we did differently was we played it as a light, friendly trading game. Played it within the spirit of the rules, not just the letter. Now, if you need to do that in order to have a good time with it, and there's nothing in the rules that forces you to do that, is that a flaw in those rules? Is the spirit of the game, the way we play it, a part of the rules? Let's set aside board games for a moment, where the rules are messy, subject to human interpretation and adjudication, and look instead at video games where the rules are a lot more rigid. Maybe. Like Root, Super Mario Bros. Has 2 rule books. The instruction manual is the equivalent of the Learning to Play guide. Here's the English language version that came with the American release of the game. It tells you, the player, how the game works, how power-ups work, who your enemies are, and how you get more points by defeating multiple enemies in a row. They call it the domino effect, and they tell you to ask your parents about it. So I did, and I got a very confusing talk about the dangers of communism. The other rule book looks a little like this. This is the assembly code for Super Mario Bros. This version has commentary by someone called 1WERT3R and runs 16,352 lines. And we expect these 2 sets of rules to be more or less a match. The book says Mario jumps higher if you hold the button down longer, and the code makes that happen. Now, there are some rules that are deliberately omitted from the manual. For example, when you jump on the flagpole, if the timer ends in 1, 3, or 6, you get 1, 3, or 6 fireworks, each scoring 500 points. This is there on purpose. There are other things that aren't. If you are transformed by a mushroom or flower, you stop moving for a moment while the animation and sound effect plays. Once that's done, you'll keep moving based on your previous momentum and inputs. If you're in midair when this happens, you stop jumping, but you also don't fall immediately. Because of this, if you let go of the jump button and then press it again just as you touch the mushroom, you can jump again in midair. Now, this isn't something like the fireworks, which were built into the code on purpose. This is an unintended interaction, and it's one that was removed in later re-releases, such as Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. This is a pretty innocuous example. Mushroom jumping is a weird trick, but that doesn't really change the game. But what about a wall jump? If you jump at a wall or pipe within a specific 4-pixel window, for a single frame, the game thinks you're standing on the ground, and during that single frame, 1/60th of a second, you can press the button to jump again. A specific wall jump off a pipe in 8.4 is a pretty standard part of most speedruns. Here's the current world record holder, Nifsky, pulling it off. Another key component of any SMB speedrun is the 4-2 wrong warp.
Oh my god! Oh my god! What is happening? This is back to back! I can't.
This vine goes to this warp zone area. This pipe goes to this underground area. The game only stores one area at a time, and it determines where the vine or pipe goes based on the screen position. By backwards jumping against walls, you can change Mario's screen position so that the warp zone is still loaded when he goes down the pipe. And this saves a few seconds because you're not waiting on the vine animation when the screen transitions. For a long time, leaderboards disqualified runs that used glitches, arguing that it's not in the spirit of the game. You're not playing it the way it was intended to be played, but speedrunning isn't the way it was intended to be played anyway. And over time, the last 15 years, has been a shift towards, well, glitches are good actually, and hey, who decided you were in charge in the first place?
Nobody is gonna tell me what the fuck to do.
This act of deconstruction is a way of playing the game, and it's one I understand the appeal of. It's really exhilarating to watch someone execute at a high level, and it's really interesting to hear people get into the weeds about frame rules and subpixels. It's a way of playing the game that's about understanding the rules, playing with the rules on like an atomic level, and I find that really fascinating. And all of this is part of the rules of Mario, the way the machine works, but it's not part of the rules of Mario the way you play the game, unless you're going to be speedrunning. Like, I don't need to know about mushroom jumps in order to clear a gap. I don't need to make a wall jump in order to get up on a platform. Except for when I do. This is Super Lava Brothers, a ROM hack of the original game, made by the speedrunner Cosmic, which removes the floor except in those parts of the game where it made it impossible. Other than changing the level design and giving the player infinite lives, which, thank you, I need those, this has the same code, the same rules as Super Mario Brothers. And 1-1 was tricky but very doable for me. Then I got to 1-2. Now he's removed a block to make this possible, but in order to get up there, I need to execute a wall jump, which, to be clear, I cannot do. I am very sure of this. I tried so many times. There were a few times when I got the positioning right. There's Mario clipping into the wall for the one frame I need, but I can't quite hit the button within that frame to pull off the jump. Here's Cosmic later in that same level.
Okay, so here's the thing. You might recognize this part as, oh, this is where the 1-up is, but I replaced it with a mushroom. We're gonna do a mushroom jump to make it all the way over here.
And like, I cannot tell you how many attempts it took for me to pull off a mushroom jump when there was ground. So this is not for me, it's for those expert players. I should mention before I move on that Cosmic made 2 other versions of Super Lava Brothers, a glitchless version, which doesn't require these kinds of shenanigans, and an easier version aimed at a more general audience. And all 3 versions have the same rules as the original game, except they don't, because level design is rule design. Rules restrict and empower us within the context of a game and its specifics. And those specifics not only communicate the rules to us, but give them meaning. Mario can stomp on most enemies to defeat them, but if every enemy is a Spiny, even if it's there in the code, Mario cannot actually stomp on enemies. Quick aside, I threw this together in like 4 minutes, and I did not add that Lakitu. The game spawned it. The presence of Spinies in a level without a Lakitu is what triggers the Lakitu respawn timer. I didn't know that. That's really cool. You can do a mushroom jump, but it's only a rule in ROM hacks like Lava Brothers, because there's never a gap that needs a mushroom jump. Again, we're talking about 2 different layers here. But there's a third layer existing on top of those, a third kind of rule, one which binds not the player, but the game, and is communicated non-verbally through play. You never come across a gap in Mario and think, I'm not sure if Mario can jump that far. You know that you can, because the game has told you over and over again. If you see a strawberry in Celeste, You know it's not just there for aesthetics or to taunt you. There's a way to get to it. You just have to figure it out. In a way, we're talking about being fair to the player, but we're also talking about the game communicating to you what fair even is in the first place. As an example, let's look at Connections. This is a puzzle created by the New York Times. I don't play it there because I don't give the New York Times money, and neither should you. I play it at this website. Each puzzle has 16 words, and you have to sort them into 4 categories of 4 each. Now, you don't know what those categories are, and the challenge is that some words feel like they could belong to multiple potential categories. And that's it, really. Those are the rules of Connections, at least the rules that exist on those first 2 layers. But there are a couple of other rules which can function as heuristics to help you solve the puzzle. Unless it's a meta category like palindromes with the letter E or color homonyms, the words in a category will be in the same tense and grammatical number. If 3 words seem to fit together in a category but you can't find a 4th, then those 3 words are not all part of the same category. And if you think you have a category but there are 5 words that fit, maybe 4 of those words do form a category, but it's not the one you think it is. It's going to be a category that of necessity will omit that 5th word. The game doesn't tell you these rules outright. In fact, I wasn't really consciously aware of them until my partner Salwin mentioned them in the context of a puzzle we were working through together. But the game isn't trying to stump you or beat you. It's trying to help you solve it. It's the same thing in a video game where a level designer wants you to move from the start to the finish and will point you in the right direction. Sometimes this is subtle, and sometimes it's done with big splashes of yellow paint. But if you've ever said, well, it feels like the game wants me to go here, it's you recognizing the basic rules of level design and trusting the game's creators to follow them. The game is working with you, not against you. It's cooperative, not adversarial. And to be clear, this distinction has nothing to do with difficulty. Super Lava Brothers is hard, but it's not adversarial. It does demand a lot of technical skill I don't have and not interested in putting in the hours to acquire, but it absolutely wants you to get there. It wants you to pull off that wall jump. You can trust it to play fair. That 3rd layer of rules is intact. An adversarial game, on the other hand, plays with that layer, subverts those rules and expectations. Most games reward exploration and forward momentum. These games often punish you for your curiosity. Most games use clear patterns to teach you the rules. Here, learning those patterns, learning those rules, only sets you up for a rug pull. The notoriously lethal Dungeons & Dragons module, Tomb of Horrors, is full of these kinds of mean tricks and stupid traps.
This 10-foot deep open pit completely fills the passageway and extends so as to make jumping across it totally impossible for most creatures. Ergo, the pit must be crossed by climbing down and walking across it, then climbing up the other side. Simple. But wrong. Any footstep upon the last 3 feet of the east portion of the pit will cause a volley of spikes to be discharged upward, and each person in the pit or leaning over its edge will be struck by 2 to 5 spikes, each hit causing 1 to 6 hit points of damage, no saving throw.
TTRPGs are fundamentally collaborative. The GM and the players are on the same side. It's the one social rule that makes all of these games work, and adversarial designs like Tomb of Horrors break that rule, break that essential trust. And if you pull out Tomb of Horrors as the next adventure of our weekly game, I'm not coming back. But on the other hand, if you said, hey, I'm inflicting Tomb of Horrors on some friends, do you want to suffer for me? I might say yes, because it's gonna be ridiculous. It's such a sadistic piece of design, and that's kind of entertaining. In that respect, I think it's similar to Campaign for North Africa. Now, as much as I appreciate the shitpost nature of Campaign for North Africa, I wouldn't spend 1,200 hours actually playing it. That sounds terrible. I feel like the joke wears a little thin real quick, and I find that my appetite for this sort of design really depends a lot on the tone, the purpose, and the time investment. For example, What the Golf often plays in this space, but it does so in bite-sized pieces and in service of some gentle mischief, so that really works for me.
You seemed confused when there wasn't a ball, so here, they gave you your ball back.
Oh, this is a delight. Okay, wait, what? What's the gag here?
Like, golf. The gag is golf, and about like in life.
Whereas most Kaizo stuff really doesn't. Like, when I play Mario, I want to play Mario, not this. I recently got Super Mario Maker 2, and one of the things I was really interested in digging into was the tutorials, where a pigeon teaches you level design, and it is primarily concerned with level design, not with understanding your toolkit and how the various objects in it function, but with how the game's designers intend you to use those tools. It's really focused on that third layer, on why you shouldn't violate the trust of the player, why you should treat them fairly. No, seriously, treat the player fairly. Don't be mean. Don't pull pranks on them. It's like Nintendo saw what the Mario ROM hacking scene was like, and so they took this opportunity to say, hey, knock it off. These are the rules of Mario, and here's why it's a bad idea to break them. And the community heard all this. They took it in, and they responded.
Nobody is going to tell me what the fuck to do.
I don't enjoy playing these levels, but I do find this kind of design interesting, because it gets its juice from playing with rules. When the gags work, it's because they're violating those rules in a clever or creative way. It's in conversation with the rules of Mario, in conversation with traditional game design. My favorite recent bit of adversarial design is the password game, which went viral last year. Rather than being about breaking rules, it's about piling them on in the form of increasingly ridiculous password requirements. It starts with the standards: minimum character length must include a number, uppercase letter, special character, but then it asks that the Arabic numerals add up to 25, the Roman numerals multiply to 35, make sure you include a sponsor, incorporate a CAPTCHA, do today's Wordle and GeoGuessr. How about the solution to a chess puzzle? The elements in your password must have atomic numbers that add up to 200. And also, this is my chicken Paul. He hasn't hatched yet. Please put him in your password and keep him safe. A lot of the comedy here comes from the subject that's being lampooned. The essentially useless cybersecurity theater of Byzantine password requirements. But the thing I find most interesting about it is the way these requirements are drip-fed to us one at a time. The rules are numbered, and the next rule in sequence only reveals itself when the previous ones are satisfied. The trick, of course, is that satisfying a new requirement often unsatisfies a previous one, so you might need to backtrack to fix it. This gives you the troll-like sense of the game changing the rules on you. And that's before the password catches on fire and you have to do most of it over again. Consider for a moment how much this structure shapes the experience. If this was an analog game where we learned all the rules beforehand, had them all in front of us, creating our password might be arduous, might be frustrating, but we wouldn't experience that same rug pull. It wouldn't feel like the game blowing us a raspberry. This structure, this sequencing, creates meaning, and it's the same structure that's present in a less disruptive way in most video games. It's often seen as one of the advantages of video games over board games, because not only does it run the game for you, but it teaches you as you play it. So my girlfriend is sleeping in the room that I shot most of this in, so today I'm shooting this part in here. I'm also wearing her t-shirt, don't tell her, and I've stolen her Tizo plushie for some reason. This is foreshadowing. Anyway, the structure we've been talking about, it works really well for games that have a narrative or the shape of a narrative, a story shape. We've talked about this before in a previous video. You know, Mario does not really have a story, but it has the shape of a story, a progression of new locales, new gizmos, new characters, enemies, and, you know, the first time you encounter a Hammer Brother, you figure out what his whole deal is. That's a new mechanic, sort of, but generally the core mechanics of Mario are the same, and it's just different variations on that. So let's look at a game where that's not the case. I'm going to talk about Pyre, a game I'm really happy that Samhain introduced me to. It's essentially, what if a visual novel was also an NBA Jam? It takes place in The Downside. This vibrant collection of prog rock album covers is the desolate landscape where the authoritarian Commonwealth sends its undesirables. It's possible to win back your freedom and return to the Commonwealth by participating in The Rights, a series of 3v3 basketball games.
And there it is, at last. The Nightwings proved their worth. Godspeed, Rookie Greentail.
You control the fate of the Nightwings, a diverse group of outcasts intent on overthrowing the Commonwealth once they get home. The game really hits you in the found family feels if you're susceptible to that, which I absolutely am. And the characters are all quite distinct. I don't have the time to communicate how strong the writing is, how each character's personality, personal problems, and relationships with the other members is at once broadly drawn but quite nuanced and well-rounded. As you free each of them one by one, or fail to, each season's culminating liberation rite has a real emotional weight. Your rivals are also well-drawn and sympathetic, and often have ties to members of your team, to the point where sometimes your team members are rooting for them. More than once, I threw a game so they could be free, even as it threatened the overall plan of revolution. So let's talk about how those games actually work. You choose 3 members of your team to play in each match, and each team's goal is to extinguish the enemy's pyre by repeatedly dousing it with a celestial orb. Each character has an aura, a defensive area around them, which can banish enemies that come in contact with it. And your aura can be projected as an attack in ways that differ for each character. Just as each character has a very distinct personality, each has a very distinct mechanical identity. Participating in the rites gives them each enlightenment, basically XP, and as they level up, they gain additional character-specific abilities. You can level up faster by invoking Titan Stars for the match, adding special conditions that disadvantage you. The more you add, the faster your game's going to be, but only if you manage to win that match. You can also equip each of your players with a talisman, giving them special abilities or bonuses. These can be leveled up by using Stardust, and both talismans and Stardust can be purchased at the shop. Money's pretty scarce though, unless you spend time hunting for resources to sell, or if you manage to impress the imps in the audience by performing feats of glory. You can also gain character-specific talismans by completing challenging 1v3 Beyonder trials. Each cycle of rites sees you play a number of matches where you choose your opponent, and this affects each team's standing, which in turn determines who you will actually face in each liberation rite.
Your many adversaries all did strive to earn this opportunity. 'Twas the fate which earned it.
So there's some real meat here, but on the whole, it's not complicated the way, say, a 4X game is complicated. But the game I just described, one with all those moving pieces, you don't start playing it until you're 6 hours in, about halfway through the game. Each of these elements, choosing from a larger roster of characters, the talismans, the Beyonder trials, the Titan stars, the feats of glory, even choosing which team you'll face, each of them are introduced gradually, tied to a story beat. It feels quite organic, I think, because Pyre is a story-driven game, and the action gameplay is part of that story. Like our boy Henry James said, it's a living thing, all one and continuous. In games where these aspects feel more distinct or where there's no story at all, this gradual ramping up of mechanical complexity can feel a little bit like the game's holding your hand when you're trying to get across the street. Like, yes, okay, press X to jump, I get it. Can we take off the training wheels and let me play the real game, please? I find this particularly exasperating in puzzle games, where sometimes the first few puzzles just aren't really puzzles. Like, I absolutely adore Plungeroo. It's a game of the year for me, and it says it has 99 puzzles, but does it? Is this really a puzzle? How about this one? I guess 97 puzzles doesn't have the right ring to it. Freshly Frosted is a puzzle game that has chill vibes, but it can get really devilish. You've really got to think these things through, but gosh, it takes a long time to get to the part where you're thinking.
Now we need to pass by the frosting station.
I think my problem here isn't the staging of mechanical complexity, isn't the fact that the game is teaching you these things gradually, but the way in which the game is teaching you. Even if I'm doing the clicking and the dragging myself, I'm not thinking through the problems myself, I'm just doing what I'm told. The game is taking my turn for me. Compare this to something like Steven's Sausage Roll, which absolutely just throws you in the deep end. It gives you a goal, brown each side of each sausage exactly once, and tells you the controls and leaves you to figure out how to get there. Trusts you to figure out how to get there. And it keeps on trusting you as it gives you new elements without really explaining them. In a way, it's a different sort of adversarial design, the video game equivalent of pulling a bean dad. When people talk about what an advantage it is that video games teach you as you go, they're usually talking about the click here and now drag this there tutorial approach to incremental complexity. But I think this other approach, one that centers experimentation and discovery, is more compelling, both as game design and as pedagogy. This year's smash hit Metroidvania Animal Well is very much in this vein. When the game gives you a new tool, it doesn't really tell you what it does or why it's useful. And a tool might have multiple applications. Firecrackers, for example, will both light up darkened areas and frighten away enemies, which is necessary because your little blob thing is basically defenseless. As you navigate this creepy, damp labyrinth, you flip switches to open passageways, but there are some switches you can't access. As soon as you get the throwing disc, a frisbee, the first thing you do is get killed. But after you find the false disc and swap it out, the first thing you do is think, okay, I can use this disc to hit those switches. And when you do it, you'll notice it ricochets. And maybe you realize, oh, I can jump on it. And hey, what happens if you throw it to a dog? I'm going to admit, when I figured it out, I felt a little dumb because, in retrospect, this is maybe the most obvious application for this tool. But I also felt really delighted. Partially it's because this is pretty adorable, and partially because it's fun to figure things out if the game gives me space to do so. A lot of people assume Six Moons was my take on language translation video games like Chance of Sonar, but a much bigger influence are games that foreground self-directed learning and discovery of the rules of the game itself. And there's a reason why this is standard in video games but rare in board games. A reason that has nothing to do with complexity or processing power or even inherent qualities of each form, but rather the types of games that just happen to be predominant in those forms due to reasons of social conventions and commercial interests. It's the elephant in the room when discussing all of this. Player count. Most video games are solitary pleasures. They have the luxury of teaching you as you go or giving you room to figure it out because you can do it at your own pace and it doesn't inconvenience anybody else. Most board games, on the other hand, are played with other people, so we all need to be on the same page before we get started. Hence the upfront teach. In fact, if we look at video games that are played with other people, that learning process is often likewise front-loaded. You want to get into Dota? Here, have 5 hours of tutorials. Then you'll be competent enough that your teammates will only sometimes call you slurs. So, what are rules? A lot of things. We treat them like they're either good or bad, but that assumes games are just machines, things that work or don't, products that can be objectively judged instead of art that can be experienced. That experience is shaped by the way the rules are taught to us, and the design of the game is shaped by the way the rules are written. But some rules aren't written at all, existing as expectations or social conventions. And in that inherent ambiguity, there exists a lot of space to play with rules, to obstinately, joyfully refuse to do what's expected or intended, both as designers and as players. It's a natural impulse. All humans do it, because rules in games are very human things, and just as subjective, just as complicated and contradictory as any other human thing.